Hey all, it is Nikki. Welcome back to the channel where today I'm going to be breaking down some of the biggest mistakes that I used to make while writing dialogue and that I am still, present tense, trying to fix. So dialogue is like such a huge topic. I feel like once I get going on this, I could just go on and on forever. I figured the best way to dive in would be to go back into my old stuff and look at some of the stuff that I used to do wrong, which have improved, but I'm sure a lot of them still sneak their way into my current stuff. To start with, I feel like as like a baseline issue for dialogue, I just didn't have enough conversations in my stories. I didn't give my characters space to just talk to each other in a casual context. It was always very like contrived and forced. And I should also clarify that when I say conversation, I don't just mean like a couple lines thrown back and forth. I mean a moment where the substance of the scene is talking, where that is almost the action. That's the part of the scene that we're supposed to be engaged with. Now, I did have conversations in my old drafts of stuff. I know that I did. Obviously, you can't have a story without conversation, but not sure you can, but you know what I'm saying. The problem with my conversations was that they were all very significant. Like I had these huge moments where I just had a ton of information that I had to dump to the reader through super long conversations, and that's how it felt. The effect was that they were huge, cumbersome moments where there was way too much talking relative to the rest of the story, which was mostly action and not a lot of talking. I think the biggest obstacle there, or the biggest issue there, was that I kind of thought I had to make conversation as minimal as possible in the rest of the story. Like I thought readers want action, not talking. I didn't give my characters chances to just chat with each other. I didn't make the story a space where characters could just talk, so that when I did get to those moments, it felt like something new and just sort of jarring, like, whoa, this is a lot of talking. What changed that sort of way of thinking was reading some fantasy, adult and young adult, where conversation was like totally allowed and awesome, and showed me that that can be super engaging. For one, I'm gonna sound like a broken record here, but the Stormlight Archive has a ton of conversation, and that's probably why it's so long, but I love that. It's not just an adult fantasy. I recently read Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom, which I think would be like a young adult fantasy, so a younger target audience that has like a shorter attention span, presumably. It's not a series that I would purchase for myself or necessarily recommend that someone else purchase, but I totally thought that they were well crafted and well written, and one of the things that really stood out to me was how much talking there was. With these young characters for a young target audience, you'd have chapters of just conversation. And yeah, some of it's related to the plot, but a lot of it was just like humor and digressions. Those books and reading those stories kind of gave me permission, I felt like, to have more conversation and to realize that, hey, like conversations in books can be just as engaging as action. My number two mistake, and I've sort of touched on this already, is that I thought that like every single line of dialogue had to be crucial to the plot. Every time somebody says something, they have to be making some critical observation or like dropping a world building detail or contributing to some subplot, and there was no place for just like talking. That meant that there was basically no humor and no tension cutting because everything had to be targeted toward driving the plot, driving the character arc, contributing to world building. Everything was so like contrived and forced that there was no natural conversation happening like ever. And I didn't think of it in those terms until I started prepping for this video, but it's true. Like I never gave my characters a chance to see where a conversation would go if they didn't have like 30 plot points that they needed to hit or a bunch of information to download. What would they talk about? Where would that conversation go, and how would that make them more endearing to the reader? One of my favorite examples of this just casual conversation is in the Lunar Chronicles, when a bunch of the ensemble cast are playing cards together and arguing over the rules. It does not have anything to do with the plot. It doesn't even really have anything to do with their character arcs. It just makes you love them more. It just shows you why they're amazing and why they're fun together. And it reminded me that not every conversation has to be plot oriented. Sometimes you can give your characters just a little bit of space to show who they are and to be together and to interact. Next, this is one that I actually still struggle with. The other one's not so much, but this, definitely. I used to use way too many dialogue tags, like just in general, way too many. And if you don't know what a dialogue tag is, those are those like little lines that happen before or after or in the middle of a line of dialogue, just to give you some information about who's talking, how they're saying it, maybe some like extra description about what they're doing with their bodies at that particular moment. For example, "I love you," said Princess Leia. "I know," said Han Solo as he descended into the mist. The "I love you, I know," that's the dialogue. All the extra info, that's not what the character is saying, that's the dialogue tag. I tended to use a ton of those in a lot of my older stuff. I think I just hadn't figured out that you could write a conversation without using them so extensively, I probably thought, oh, I need to clarify with every line who's talking and how they're saying it. You don't always have to do that. Readers are very smart and they can figure things out intuitively, especially if it's just a conversation with two people. Then, as long as you throw in a tag every so often to give them a reference point, like this line is by Princess Leia. Okay, that means the next one will be Han Solo, the one after that will be Princess Leia again. You can keep it fairly minimal, just checking in every so often with tags to make sure the reader can still follow you. It gets more complicated if you have more people talking, but you still don't always need to use a tag per line of dialogue. Even if, say, you have 3 people talking, sometimes you can tell just by what they're saying. Like if you have one character who's like really angry and sarcastic, and another character who's like really kind or speaks with a certain dialect, and another one who you name, you can figure out the other two based on what they're saying, because what they say is probably going to be very distinctive to their personalities. Because readers are smart, they are able to piece things together. I hope that makes some kind of sense. Also, there are moments where I deliberately choose not to use dialogue tags at all, and that is usually to create a sense of like chaos or dysfunction. So for example, in one of my projects, I have like a trial scene. It begins very orderly, like people are speaking one at a time, lots of dialogue tags, it's moving rather slowly, but then by the end, things really pick up and kind of get out of control and nobody really knows what's going on, and so I just dropped in a bunch of lines of dialogue with no tags. The effect of that is to make it seem very chaotic. Like the important thing is not who's saying what, the important thing is that a bunch of people are flinging words out there and it's chaos and super dysfunctional. So that is one situation where you can omit dialogue tags deliberately and create a cool effect with it. In general, I think I'm just a wordy person, and so I always feel the need to put in more extra info than is necessary. If you find yourself in that boat where you're always needing to add a description of what the person's doing with their face while they're talking or what they're doing with their body while they're talking, maybe try and check that and see, would this be just as impactful if I just put in the line of dialogue and didn't show what they were doing? Finally, said. I think that I used to have like a fear of said or an aversion to said. I probably thought it was like too basic and I need to find something fancy. In my old stuff, I have all these alternate words for said. Some of them are like applicable, but some of them are just, they just look forced. Like I went onto thesaurus.com and tried to find another way to say said. Rookie mistake. I have a pin saved on Pinterest that's like a gazillion different ways to say said. And yes, like sometimes it's useful to find an alternate word, especially if you're trying to describe like a very specific way of speaking. Like the person has a very raspy voice at this moment, or the person is screaming at this moment. Like yes, there are circumstances where said isn't even applicable. But if I'm just trying to find like fancy alternate ways to say it when that's all the character is doing, they're saying something, then I think that's kind of a waste. What we really should be focusing on is making the actual line of dialogue, the substance of what the character is saying, as impactful and awesome as possible. And if that means using a well-placed said, which is tried and true and gets the job done, you can do that. Don't be afraid of said. A lot of these things, again, are things that I still sort of catch myself doing sometimes and working through. But God has used other writers and books and stories to teach me stuff about my own mistakes and how to make them better. So if I can help anyone else, that is mission accomplished for me. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to like and subscribe and comment below with something that you find really challenging while writing dialogue, because there are just so many things. And finally, as always, do not forget to spend some time in the clouds today.